Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. This is part 4 of our Extra Life 2019 recap and the final portion of our Twitch Extra Life 2019 recap. Anyway, this is our retiree super mission flight. We are finally going to officially activate Hotel CosCosmos and bring along its very first batch of inhabitants, visitors, prisoners. Anyway, some of our crew have been actively flying missions since, the 1950s. More than a few on here were some of the first girls to set foot on the moon. Uh, of course, our entire crew from our first venture onto the surface of Mars and into Mars orbit, and even the crew from our second venture to Mars have officially reached their retirement dates, with the exception of the one or two who are still currently on an active flight and will be retiring after they hopefully return safely to the Earth. There's a bunch of hero parades and stuff like that that need to happen in the meantime for that. But that is the whole point of Hotel CosCosmos, is to give a nice, comfy retirement to Kerbals who have probably gone a little past their active service stage. And wow, I forgot about that. Booster decouple and a little bit of radical spinning and then fighting with it to get it back on course here. I do not remember what the hell exactly happened with that. But rest assured, we were able to wrestle this under control because we have a highly trained, highly skilled flight crew, and it had nothing to do with me playing Kerbal Space Program for practically 10 hours straight at this juncture, and having gone without sleep for many, many, many hours at this point. So this is, of course, a Shuriken Mark 6K, our crew carrier variant that we use just to ferry crew to and from Kauai Potato Station, where the crew will dock and then transfer over to, I think we took Nemo out for this venture to make the trip out to the moon and perform rendezvous and docking with the Hotel CosCosmos in a near polar lunar orbit so that they can, I don't know, play pickleball and enjoy the view uh, forever. Yeah, something like that. So we're pretty much in the burn to orbit phase of our deployment here, riding on those three HG3. I believe they're the Dash 1 vacuum optimized variant because that's where they spend the vast majority of their time. There's our camera change, and now, of course, we have to pump the aerosine and nitrogen tetroxide from the EFT into the orbiter so that we can have some OMS fuel to do all the nice rendezvousing like things, etc., etc. So thankfully, in sped up footage, that fuel transfer does not take very long, and we can go ahead and jettison the EFT. We'll have to probably come back and remove that a little later, or just let its orbit decay slowly and eventually. So now we will try to get ourselves set up to make a rendezvous with Kauai Potato Station, or otherwise normalize our orbit in such a manner that we can perform said rendezvous. So we'll open up our cargo bay and get those solar panels deployed just to make sure that we can keep the lights on here in our nice Mark 6, and then light the OMS engine and make this burn to actually lower our apogee considerably. Let me just verify. Now, we were raising our periapsis. We're now at 544 by 244 kilometer orbit, and just trying to make a few more corrections and phase our orbits appropriately. So when we time warp ahead, we can let our closest approach indicators uh, come closer to one another. It's got to be a better way to phrase that. So we'll plot a node on the opposite side of the planet and just try very carefully to dial this in. Kerbal Space Program is not going to cooperate with us. It is going to instead just bounce those indicators around a lot. So we'll actually experiment with some radial out amongst other things, but really we're just going to go ahead and warp around to about where this node is and burn radial in. Sorry, I misspoke earlier, and just instead pay attention to this nice Mech Jeb window that we have going on here, because that separation at closest approach indicator is going to be far more accurate, far more valuable, and far more stable than the stock one included with the game. So a lot of radial in will get that separation of closest approach below 100 kilometers, and we'll just keep that engine right on going well past the node that we plotted, so that we can, I don't know, try not to go suborbital on accident, which I have done many times before. Just not with a crew, thankfully. It does get a little more touchy once we get to sub 20 kilometers separation at closest approach, requiring a lot of dialing in on RCS, but we'll actually just go ahead and warp around to about 90 degrees out from where this encounter should take place, and try to touch it up on thrusters by pointing in other directions. Now that we're a whole lot closer, it should be less touchy, but a lot easier to actually find the vector on which we need to correct to make this rendezvous a thing. I mean, you'd think, but super exhausted me was super exhausted, and certainly not operating at peak efficiency as far as how easy it is to actually do these things. This is kind of the indicator to me is when I need to be done playing games on this save, because I was just absolutely a wreck and could not think very clearly. But with a 78 meter per second correction to kind of dial us in and normalize our orbit, I think we can get this separation at closest approach down a whole lot lower by basically phasing our orbit in, and then we have a lot broader time span on which to make these corrections. So we'll go ahead and get around to that node. We'll light up our AJ10 118K and kind of burn for broke. Although you see that separation at closest approach is not changing. It's because we're actually at our closest approach. And we're just going to phase in our orbit, sink it a little above where the station is, so that we can drift away on this side of our orbit and then come back around on our next half pass, I guess. Yeah, there. Our separation at closest approach started falling very quickly. So now we can ignore the node, shut down the engine, and rely solely on RCS to try to dial this correction in as much as we can. A little bit of physics warp will absolutely help with this, because yeah, we're going to make a full half orbit or so before we make our rendezvous, which is just fine. They'll make it to the station. Everything will be okay. No spoilers. Yeah, anyway, lots of just at this point, I think it was just the H key. Yeah, because my roll, yaw, and pitch indicators are not showing anything. I should rely on those for knowing which key I'm hitting, but that would require knowing what key corresponds to what axis. And all things I really should have picked up by now. But separation at closest approach is sub 1 kilometer, and we're actually going to try to dial it in as close as we can. So at 24 meters closest distance, we will disarm the RCS. So that Mech Jeb and SAS can't screw that up for us. We'd like to come in nice and close, because off-axis docking are always a whole lot of fun. Thankfully, our total difference in speed with our target is about 12 meters per second, which shouldn't take very long for us to burn off on the back of this AJ-10. Although just the act of correcting which way we need to be facing in order to make it a thing has upped that distance to over 200 meters. But we will get the engine lit and start to bleed off some of that extra speed a little too eagerly, I might add. So we'll try to re-angle ourselves and then get ourselves set up for docking. We would like to come in and dock on that long-armed port. Thankfully, we're on the correct side of the station for that. As soon as we can actually select it as a target. Yeah, not today. KSP says not today. Now, we're just not close enough is the big problem, but we do have lots of control authority on most axes. I think the retrograde or retro nose axis braking from going forward down the nose is a little sluggish, but that's just how things kind of have to be if you don't want to burn off all your thruster ports on reentry. And having such an angled nose makes it difficult. Made extra weird by the fact that there are RCS ports on the graphic for this cockpit that aren't actually RCS ports. Well, you know. I guess more integrated equipment means less versatility in things you're actually building, so it's not really a complaint, except that maybe the texture doesn't need to be there. Anyway, not that that matters. We are on our actual docking approach, and I'm kind of happy to be back to an off-axis docking for a change. I do actually find these a whole lot easier, and I know I've said that like 1,000 times before, but I don't know, just something about the translation goes a whole lot easier. There is our nice, well-lit airlock / docking adapter for the SKS Heavy, using its new docking standard, which much broader port, relatively easy to hit. And now we can start correcting our approach. Man, it does look like we're coming in real fast here. I promise you we are not. This footage is very, very, very sped up. So while this approach may have looked like it was a little hair-raising and ballsy, it was not. It was very slow, painfully as such, as I was trying desperately not to fall asleep. And I'm sure you'll be able to tell exactly how tired I was by exactly how bad this docking is. Certainly not my worst, not my most painful, but certainly not near as clean as it could have been, with quite a bit of overcorrecting, and of course the obligatory I forgot to pull the solar panels in until it was practically too late. I'm getting nervous myself sitting here watching, like, why are these things still extended? There you go. Way to go, old Crash. Good job. Excellent work not breaking off a solar panel. And somebody here has left the lights on. That's no good. I don't know, maybe you need to keep it warm. Is the cupola powered by those old incandescent bulbs? I mean, it's only like 93, so I don't know. I guess they'd be non-compact fluorescents. It would make way more sense for LEDs, but anyway, we're on our actual final approach here, and it's just a bunch of finally trying to dial it in, and never really being anywhere near where we needed to be. Yeah, look at how aft that port is for us. Although we're trying to normalize in one direction, we might just give the station a little nudge with our tail engine mount there, and then finally we'll decide to maybe correct and bring this in, you know, somewhat. Probably get it, clear the tail fins first. I'd really prefer not to lose one of those up here. Dispatching rescue craft, not my strongest suit. But we are moving the port up, as indicated by the very bright flashlight contained within the docking port that absolutely is there only to help you with docking alignment. It is our alignment indicator, if you will. And now we can start making an approach for this docking port in earnest. Again, looks a whole lot faster than it actually was. This was actually very, 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 very slow. But I've think I've done us all the kindness of speeding the footage up a whole lot. This angle right here, is why I like off-axis dockings so much. It's very easy to see how not on target you are and predict the exact areas onto which you're going to lose paint on your docking ports while just mercilessly grinding them together at orbital speeds. There's the magnets finally taking effect. Unfortunately, we're still just a bit too far off, so we'll pull back and then bang, docked. I think finally might be the appropriate term here, but you know, hey, it worked. No one got depressurized. Everyone is a-okay. And so we'll go through the tedious process of opening all the hatches so that we can just direct transfer our crew thanks to connected living space. Virginia Rodriguez and one other crew member already transferred in. I think next will be Glenn Armstrong. He, of course, was the first Kerbal on the surface of Mars. And then Nina, the famous engineer from the second flight. Famed engineer and demolitions expert Boris, and then Alice Campbell will follow suit, all boarding the Nemo spacecraft, which should already be topped off and fueled, although we'll probably have to give that a second check just to make sure. I'm sure I will, because I was real tired. Oh, yep, look at that. There is some fuel missing. Probably from the last crew that was here. It stayed for quite a while, and there may have been some RCS corrections from the station to get that SKS docked appropriately, and any tank not locked will, of course, drain fuel. So next we'll double check, make sure all the life support supplies are topped off, or just in case. We do need to make sure everyone is fully fed for the trip out there. I think about a month of life support for the 6 crew, and this is actually the largest crew ever ferried anywhere on a Nemo vessel, or any of its type, since it's been in service. We've really just used it to carry 4 crew out to the moon for deployment to Rosalina Memorial Station, which we do hope to have brought back online sometime in the very near future. We have one part left in that reconstruction to launch, and we will get to that in the coming episodes. But this, for now, we will set our target here at the moon and try to adjust things out. Maybe we can get our inclination to not be so incredibly terrible. But with not all of our tanks unlocked, we need to drain the pontoons first. This will help with balance, although they're well within the range of the gimbal on these 118Ks, which will need to be activated through staging to make sure that their gimbal is truly active. But we are none too far from our node. We're estimating about a 8-minute burn, was it? Or maybe it was a 6-minute burn. No, about 9 minutes. So we'll do 3,300 meters per second in 9 minutes or so. We're also really hoping not to skim through the very, very upper part of the atmosphere. But I think we're... Nope, still pushing that periapsis down. Because, yeah, we're burning 2 below horizon, which is what happens when you have longer burn times. Although 10 minutes for TLI is pretty standard for most things that we send there. That's why we like to use the long-running Hydrolox engines most of the time, although the reusability of this craft makes these AJ-10s just way, way more appealing. And a nice view down the hall as the moon rises in front of us, which of course you can't see now because I have already changed the angle. There's a little bit of a better one. Much, in fact. And the last 200 or so meters per second, we'll jump out to map view and try to dial this in. Yeah, of course, KSP doesn't want to acknowledge that this is in fact going to intercept the moon, but we know it is. Just KSP just doesn't want to admit that to us, which, you know, hey, fine. It's still totally going to be a thing. You can tell me whatever you want, KSP, it's fine. So I'm actually setting this node because we're going to come back to it a little later. I had a few other things to go pay attention to, or maybe I just wanted to make sure the node would that we could plot a mid-course correction. So I did take a very small break here, which is why we have the extended footage of Nemo departing the Earth so peacefully. And I think I'm going to save this and reuse it later. I could have rolled the craft, though. Still, it really isn't all that bad. Sometimes this game does just surprise you. Only sometimes, though. Sometimes it just irritates you. But with Nemo well underway, I would eventually come back here to the keyboard and then speed up this time warpy bit so that we can get to our mid-course correction. I already know, you already know, we all already know, we're going to the moon. KSP just actually doesn't want to admit it. I think that node was mostly there just to remind us of how much we're going to go to the moon today. So we can speed up the time warp now and bring ourselves out here. Yeah, we're just going to go ahead and delete this alarm because we know we're going to the moon. Boom, there it is. So we'll plot our correction once we're in Lunar SOI to bring our periapsis down. Not a whole lot that we're going to do about the inclination currently. We're going to insert into orbit first and then make a inclination correction to line up our orbit a little better with Hotel CosCosmos. But first, of course, we need to adjust ourselves in. I did not ullage the vessel appropriately, and we got that nice shutdown warning. And for some reason, it switched our point of control to the aft docking port, which extraordinarily weird because I certainly don't remember having accidentally done that. So there is our little touch and burn, and we'll start plotting our node for orbital insertion. I did want to try to do a single pass rendezvous because we seem to have gotten quite lucky with those during this live stream, although you can't win them all the time, so I'll take what I can get. I think we're going to have plenty of life support available to us, so we don't need to much worry about anyone running out of air. But there is our orbital insertion burn, and here is our plot to adjust our inclination to match Hotel CosCosmos and start to line ourselves up for an approach. Now, I would like to kind of keep a rendezvous on there, and then bang, there is our first pass rendezvous. Let's see if this inclination change goes well enough to keep it. We'll go ahead and go through and unlock the rest of our fuel tanks just so that we have every drop available to us, because it looks like it's going to be a pretty high horsepower burn to make that rendezvous. Several hundred meters per second will need to be displaced just as quickly as humanly possible. We do have a good amount of horsepower with these 4 AJ10s. This variant functions so much better than the 2-engine variant. It also doesn't take 17 minutes to make its TLI ejection, which is really nice. So we'll correct that separation at closest approach down on RCS. And hey, look at this, 2 rendezvous in 1 episode. How lucky. How lucky indeed. So we will also plot a node out at our Apoluna, Aposaline, Apoapsis to dial in this correction just a little bit more. It'll be a lot more sensitive, much further out. But I can also just screw with this node a whole lot, because I think I've already screwed up that first pass rendezvous thing, being all fatigued and whatnot. Not all that surprised, so I'll start just playing around with other nodes to force this intercept into being a thing. I just don't remember if I actually was able to make it work, although it looks like this node on our descending node, because our relative inclination is still 1.4 degrees, so this might be the key. Not exactly 90 degrees out or so, but when inclination is the thing keeping us from being able to make this rendezvous. It's just where you have to make the burn. So we will get within about a minute of the node, get ourselves dialed in, and then light up the main engines again, and then try to drop that separation at closest approach as best we can. It was only like, what, 30 meters per second or so, and then we can actually start to try to dial it in. We've got it down to within 40 kilometers, which not not quite good enough. So we'll try to correct up on RCS a little bit, but I think we're going to end up doing something very similar to what we did before, and going ahead with getting in closer, or just using physics warp and holding probably the H key, because yeah, our relative inclination is still falling, and there we are, within almost a kilometer, 500 meters, 300 meters, perfectly acceptable. Now our burn to circularize with our target is 520 meters per second in less than 10 minutes. So this will actually come up very, very quickly for us. We'll get within about 2 minutes or so, based loosely on our available vacuum delta V and the time it's going to take to displace that much energy. But there she is, Hotel CosCosmos. Absolutely massive, massive station, as we saw when we docked our fuel reserve tank to it. We'll be just a little bit off on our burn, leaving us more than a kilometer away, but we'll just pull a quick about face and use these RCS thrusters, which have a ton of authority, to start to bring ourselves in at almost 2 meters per second, which is a pretty fast approach, even from this range. But I was tired and impatient, as I'm sure it has happened to many of you in the past before, when missions just aren't going as cleanly as they should. Although I really have no complaints about how this one went thus far. It was almost par for the course, and we are starting to actually get ourselves dialed in here. So with a little help from physics time warp, we'll begin our final approach, although Hotel CosCosmos is massive, so it actually looks like we're a whole lot closer than we are, it being that big, but still 300 some odd meters away, is just a little deceptive, especially for me here in post-commentary voiceover mode. But as we start to get into the sub 200 kilometer range, and we will choose our docking port up near the primary ship docking node at the top of Hotel CosCosmos, and start to dial in our approach there. I think we're going to go right for this little side docking port, seeing as how we came in on this side anyway. You know, it's easy, it makes sense. There's no reason to go lapping this station for any real reason. And poor little Nemo, just the tiniest little ship ever, compared to this absolutely massive orbital platform. But we will switch our control to our aft docking port and go in for our little docking on our very large station. So still in sped up footage, we've pulled back our solar panels manually, much to the manufacturer's dismay, not using all the available action groups to us, and then started to make our final approach. Nemo has incredible control authority, so actually that last little bit of not being lined up isn't a huge deal for us. We'll just scrape a little more paint. Remember, this is a brand new Nemo. We just brought it up the 4-engine retrofit, so that's all fresh paint on that docking port that we're losing here. And docking has finally been achieved, and we are now officially on station, and our crew will go ahead and enjoy the very, very luxurious accommodations, provided, of course, that we allow the flow of oxygen and food and water to come out of the little spigots and such. Comms dish there is active, so that they can keep tabs on active flights and just be able to communicate with all of their friends who are still actively flying missions and stuff. So good for them, and we wish them all a very, very happy retirement in the relative safety of low lunar orbit. At least all the views will be spectacular, even if the room service is absolutely crap. There just wasn't anything in the budget for room service, honestly. But switching back over to Kawaii Potato Station, our crew here has performed their necessary time in low Earth orbit. They have offloaded as many of the supplies as they can, but everything here on Kawaii Potato Station is pretty much topped off and full. We need to run a lot more missions through it to kind of drain out some of these supplies. They will top off what little bits they can before making their departure, and we're actually in a pretty good place to go ahead and burn for landing. Now, it's been a very, very long time since I have flown a Shuriken Mark 6, so I'm kind of just trying to do this by memory, although my memory not so good anymore. We will be venting our excess of life support supplies, and after we're done burning our deorbit burn, we'll offload whatever excess fuel, although I think we were able to actually dump our fuel reserve entirely. I don't quite remember. It's been a couple of weeks. So here is our initial deorbit burn. Making sure that we don't leave a bunch of sandwiches on the same orbital track with the station, and instead can disperse them rightly through the atmosphere in a showering display of salami. A quick save and reload here because this thing would not load before. So the best way to deal with that is to just F5, F9, and then bring the menus back up. So we will go ahead and vent all of our excess food, water, and oxygen just to make sure that we are not over our desired tonnage for approach and landing. And man, do we have a whole lot of excess life support on board. And it's going to take a little while to vent all of it. I apologize for the most irritating noise on the face of the planet. I just, not much not much choice here. But while we're at it, we'll go ahead and decide to vent all of our waste byproducts and the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen for the fuel cells, as we'll no longer need any of that. Our batteries are nicely topped off, so that we should have more than enough to finish our reentry and approach. We'll swing our nose around, and hopefully this will be nice and lined up for when we actually hit Atmo. No, not quite. Almost right down the prograde vector. Not a bad shot in the dark, if you do ask me. So we will also pull out atmospheric autopilot and get our settings set up and ready. And I think we're way too low. Or hitting the atmosphere way too early as we cross the Terminator into dawn. I did have to just take a minute or two to admire this because it is becoming more frequent to get views like these, but man, they never stop being awesome. So we'll try to keep our nose pitched up good and high and see if we can't just generate as much lift as we can. I think we're supposed to stay around 40 degrees. Honestly, I have forgotten. It's been a good long while, and it looks like we're passing over a hurricane. Good thing we're well out of the weather system for that. We do need to angle north by just a little bit if we have any hopes of hitting that runway, but I think we're still a bit too high up to make any actual difference, although we are certainly deorbited and far enough away from land where I'm starting to get nervous. We really should be crossing over Mexico at about this speed so that we can exit Mexico's airspace at somewhere between 4 and 5 kilometers per second, which would put us right on a good enough glide slope to probably land at Cape Canaveral, although I can't testify to that. Those are just numbers that I kind of remember from doing Mark V Shuriken testing and trying very desperately to put that thing on a runway. But as it looks right now, we are going to be crossing over into the Gulf of California at low enough speeds to land. And I don't remember what the hell happened here, but something has decided that no, we're going to roll. So we will pump all of our fuel forward, very quickly regain our prograde vector, and then return to pitching up. I think maybe at this altitude, at that speed, I hate to say stall, but I think we just had too much weight aft, and we were trying to well, fly butt first, which is not the way this thing was intended to be flown. So we have decided to just go ahead and call it, especially after that little fit of spinning, that we're just going to go ahead and land here on the beach and enjoy a nice resort town with some margaritas, maybe. Why not? Poor Doug Hastings here has had more than his fair share of slightly interesting but not quite interesting enough shuttle flights. So we're just going to let him enjoy a nice beach vacation for a little while. I think he's earned it. So we're going to go ahead and rotate ourselves 90 degrees and start to fly north. I think our best chance for a nice flat spot to land is actually behind us, just to make sure that we don't end up accidentally encountering some mountains or a hill at a very undesirable moment. So this ahead of us looks pretty good and flat and nice and sandy and probably appropriate for a landing zone. So we'll just continue to bleed speed and altitude and get ourselves set up for a nice approach. This looks like a pretty good spot to set her down. So I will turn you over to Old Me for the first time in this whole episode. And of course, heavy cloud cover here at the beach. Alright, we're coming under it, 1.4 kilometer. We can go ahead and start making our approach to whatever resort we're going to land at. Is that a hill ahead of us? It looks like maybe, so I really don't want to land going uphill. We have a hard enough time not coming down to the ground slow enough to not break things. Worrying about also the ground coming up to us is going to be interesting. So while we've still got the air speed, less than a kilometer altitude, not the best, not the best, not the best. Let's divert 90 degrees and see if we can just live with the slope, get the gear down. Alright, Doug Hastings, you successfully pulled off a water landing and multiple dirt track landings in a much larger vessel. I think you can handle this. $300 meters. Let's go ahead and level out a bit. Bleed off some of this speed. Rate of descent is still too rapid. So climb it a little. Turn off RCS. We don't need that firing. It's distracting me. I'm sorry. 80 meters. Pitch up, dude. Walk it out. Bleed some speed. There's the shadow. Ah, it looks awesome. Alright, we're within threshold. We just gotta not hit the ground too hard. Perfect. Brakes, 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 brakes. Chutes deployed. All 25,000 of them. And we're stopped. That's gotta be the shortest runway track in history. Well, I guess when you land on sand, it maybe slows you down a bit more. Awesome. Well done, sir. Well done. Well, that's going to do it for this episode, everyone, and for our Extra Life 2019 recap. So thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it. I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.